Welcome back, students. Today we will continue with poetry elements. And this will be a great reference guide for you to use anytime you need to go ahead and look at or review your poetry. It's here. So let's go ahead and start with the meaning of poetry before we even get started. If you can recall, or possibly this is a review for you, a collection of words that expresses an emotion or idea, or sometimes with a specific rhythm and rhyme. But a poem doesn't always have to rhyme, and it doesn't always have a specific rhythm, but that is known as poetry. Now, when reading a poem, consider the poet's feelings and purpose for writing. Just like if you were reading a regular text, such as a narrative or expository or an article, whatever you may be reading, you always want to consider the purpose for the actual writing, such as the author's purpose. Keep in mind that there is a difference between a poem and a prose. A poem, it refers to, of course, lines and stanzas. And it has a lot to do with the emotions and expressions of ideas. But when we talk about a prose, not stating that there are not emotions or ideas expressed within that writing, keep in mind that it's a type of form of literature having ordinary language and sentence structure. So, students, to always help you better understand what you're reading, you want to analyze the text. Therefore, you would do the same with a poem. So, number one, whenever you are analyzing a poem, make sure that you at least read it more than once. So I would say don't limit yourself to more than one time of reading it. Read it at least twice. You can read it out loud to yourself, and then I would say read it quietly, okay? And this will help you build your comprehension skills, just like if you were reading another text itself. Always preview the text and think about the title and see how it relates to the poem itself. And that's what good readers also do whenever they're reading regular text. You preview it, you pull out all of the features that's available for you, text features, to help you better understand. And then you also preview any type of titles, of course, as it's stated here, any type of bolded words or subtitles or italicized words to better help you comprehend the poem. See if there's any type of illustrations or drawings that may have been provided or photographs as well. As you analyze a poem, students, you want to make sure that you understand the speaker, okay? And understand that the speaker is the center of the poem and try to identify who they're addressing. So, who is the audience? You want to consider any type of expressions that is being, of course, provided within the poem itself and determine if they are attached or detached from the actual writing. Always paraphrase what you're reading. It doesn't matter if it's, like I said, regular text or a poem. Whenever you paraphrase, we know we're using our own words, and that will help you make sure that you're understanding what you're reading, okay, as you go line by line within the poem. Examine the mood and the tone of the poem, okay, that the poet is trying to set for you as a reader. And we know when we read regular text, that's the same thing we do. We try to examine, of course, the author's purpose for us reading to help us better understand. And then try to conclude the theme. See if there's a lesson being provided within that poem or message, or if there's some type of conflict or issue that's been resolved. You know, try to figure out what that theme is. Okay. So within our poetry, there's a specific elements that define poetry or contribute to the poetry elements here. And we can see that we have figurative language. That's one of the main poetry elements. And it's very important that we understand the meaning of these figurative languages. Well, students, in order to do so, I always teach my students the acronym I shampoo. And that helps them recall the actual different figurative languages and their meanings. Okay. So I is for idioms, S is for similes, H is for hyperbole, A is for alliteration, M is for metaphors, P is for personification, O is for oxymoron, and then the other O is for automatopoeia. Also, some other important elements of poetry is theme, imagery, words, lines, stanzas, rhythm, rhyme, and descriptive adjectives. So then what's the difference between figurative and literal language? Well, there's a great difference, students. Understand that when we are talking or stating literal language, that means that we are using words or words function exactly as they are defined from a dictionary. It's literal meaning, which is denotation. Okay. For example, the car is blue. That is literally stating that there is a blue car. Okay. Another example would be he caught the ball. Well, literally, that young male or male caught the ball in his hands. That's direct literal meaning. Okay. However, when we talk about figurative language, that's where we're trying to figure out what is really being meant or stated within the words used in that poem. Okay. So, or in any type of text. So, figurative language is language that means more than what it says on the surface. It brings life to writing. So, for example, I've got your back. As you can see the illustration here or the photograph. It doesn't mean that you literally have someone's back in your hand, okay? But that's figurative language. Another example is you're a doll, okay? The implied meaning or the connotation, that's what it is. Connotation means the implied meaning, words that are based off the emotions that the author provides in the text. So you're a doll, it doesn't really mean that you are literally a doll, a baby doll, okay? But that you're very kind and that you're sweet, right? So these are some examples of figures of speech known as figurative language. So let's go into really knowing the meaning of each figurative language that was provided already earlier. So idioms is an expression whose meaning is not predictable from the usual meanings. So for example, go out there and break a leg. You hear that a lot, especially if you're playing sports or if you have something important that you need to perform or do. Okay. Doesn't mean that we want you to literally go and break your leg. It's just stating, of course, give it all you got. Try hard because we know that hard work definitely pays off. Okay. A simile. So we know that that figure of speech involves a comparison between two unlike things. And it's using the words like or as. Okay. So here we have, for example, the muscles on his brawny arms are strong as iron bands. All right. So we know that his arms are not iron bands, but they are being compared, of course, to the iron bands because they're very strong. And as you can see in the image, that's what's being displayed. Hyperbole, that's a great exaggeration, okay? It is not used to mislead the reader, but to emphasize a major point. Okay, the author wants you to pay attention and they're going to exaggerate a statement, all right, to heighten the effect of that phrase or that word. So, for example, I've told you to clean your room a million times. And I'm sure a lot of us has heard that from our parents, but they haven't literally said it a million times, but they definitely said it over and over again, right? So it's being exaggerated. Alliteration. That's the repeated consonants that are found normally at the beginning of words or within words. So, example, she was wide eyed and wondering while she waited for Walter to waken. As you can see, the w sound, okay, the repeated consonant sound of W is being used within the sentence. Metaphor. Metaphor is a figure of speech as well, comparing two unlike things. However, within this comparison, the words like or as are not being used. So, for example, the road was a ribbon wrapped through the desert. So it's comparing the road to the desert directly. And we're not using the words like or as. And it's because of a ribbon. You notice how when you wrap a ribbon, it's kind of curvy and we can tie it into a bow. Well, the same thing with this desert here surrounded by this road that is curvy, as you can see, like a ribbon. Personification. That is definitely one that we can see and break down. I love to tell my students to break down the word to pull out any type of word that you may already know. So when we look at personification, we see the word person. And so we know it's something personal, okay? And so what that means is that it's giving qualities of a person to an animal, an object, or an idea. So it's given human like qualities to a non living thing. So, for example, the wind yells while blowing. we understand that the wind cannot literally yell. Only a living being can yell. Human being, of course, but sometimes it sounds like the wind is yelling because of the loud whistling of the wind, okay? And it may sound like it's yelling, but it can't actually yell. It's just blowing really loud. Automatopoeia. The use of words that mimic sounds. So, for example, here, the firecracker made a loud kaboom. And we know that kaboom, bam, bang, those are all automatopoeia words. Those are words that mimic sounds. And then oxymoron. Oxymoron are contradictory words used in conjunction. Okay. So, for example, inside out, how can you really be inside, but then you're out? A cold sweat. How can you really be sweating if you're cold? Or alone in the crowd. How really can you be alone if you're surrounded by a crowd? However, you may feel alone if you don't know anyone, right? Those are all words that are considered an oxymoron. Symbolism, okay? Symbolism is another element for poetry, and that's a symbol or symbolism of a person, place, or object, or even an action that stands for something beyond itself. So, for example, we have Martin Luther King. We know that beyond himself, he stood for, of course, the rights, fighting for the rights of Blacks. Okay. He stood for, of course, peace, peace within the struggle of fighting for Blacks. Okay. For equality. We have fire. That's a symbol of fire. Okay. This is a raging fire symbol. And we know that fire can also symbolize sometimes anger. Okay, or it can symbolize like destruction, all right? Because you know a fire destroys things. We have the peace symbol here. Most of us know it symbolizes peace. We have, of course, Paris here, the Paris Eiffel Tower here, and we know that's the city of love. Okay, Paris is known for that, and the Eiffel Tower is standing for, of course, a powerful figure there. We have a wolf. Okay, the wolf is often used to represent loyalty or freedom, independence, or even sometimes protection of strength or guardianship. And then we have Mr. Einstein, and we know Mr. Einstein himself has been known as one of the smartest men that's ever lived upon Earth. Now, repetition. Repetition is the use of any element of language. It could be a sound, it could be a word, it can be a phrase. However, it's more than once it's being stressed in a certain idea. Okay. So, in poem, here is one of the actual sentences or lines, and it says, "The horseman came riding, riding, riding. The horseman came riding up to the old inn door." So, as you can see, the word itself, riding, has been used multiple times within this one sentence phrase here. Okay. And that's what repetition is. Now, imagery and descriptive words. Imagery is a visual representation. It's very vivid, it's very vibrant, okay? From the descriptions that appeals to the reader's senses and imagination. So descriptive words are also adjectives that appear to our five senses, such as see and taste and smell, touch, and hear. Okay. So a lot of times in poetry, the writer, the author will definitely have descriptive words included with our figurative language and imagery to give us a clear, vivid representation of what they want us to understand. And both of these elements are extremely necessary and used to express emotions or add value and purpose to poetry. Lines and stanza. Now we know that within a paragraph is what we see within our prose. It goes paragraph by paragraph, right? Including the main purpose, main point, and details or main idea with the topic sentences and things of that sort. Well, with lines and stanzas, that is what makes up our poetry, all right? So a line creates stanzas for a poem. So for example, a two-line stanza is a couplet, and a three-line stanza is a tercet, and then a four-line stanza is a quatrain, and so on. Okay. And in poetry, stanzas are visual groupings of lines. And put together kind of reminds you of a paragraph, but keep in mind they're called stanzas and not paragraphs. Now, theme versus topic. A lot of times, students, we get that a little confused. Now, a theme is a life lesson to be learned. It's the message in the story, or it's the moral of the story, okay, that the author wants us as readers to understand. And then the topic, that is the general subject of a conversation, a discussion, the whole text, a paragraph, an essay, okay, or even a poem. All right. It's the general subject. Okay. And then rhythm and rhyme. Keep in mind that every poem does not have a rhyme to it. It doesn't have to rhyme. Okay. And sometimes a poem may not have a specific pattern either. However, rhythm is the beat and pace of a poem. So, depending how we read it, all right, the rhythm is created by the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables in a line or verse. And then rhyme is the repetition of the similar to exact sounds that are normally stressed syllables at like the ending of a line of poems or a song. All right. Once again, the rhyme is normally found at the ending and it's that stressed, okay, repetition of exact sounds within a syllable of two or more words. Now, there are different types of poetry we need to learn and understand. Okay. We have limericks, we have sonnets and haikus and free verse and ballads and narrative poems, and we also have lyric poems. Limericks. Limerick poems are actually the original Irish poems, typically humorous in nature. 5 lines are used in order to create a limerick. They normally follow the AABBA rhyme scheme. And limericks are often told about a person and will include their name or a reference to them in the first line. So here we are, an example of a limerick poem. There was an old woman of Leeds who spent all her time in good deeds. She worked for the poor till her fingers wore sore. This poet's old woman of Leeds. That is a limerick's poem. And it meets all the qualifications. It has our AABBA pattern, which means that the ending rhyme, of course, word here, the syllable stressed, is leads and D's, which is our A rhyme scheme pattern. Then poor and sore. They do not rhyme with leads and deeds. And so you have to go within a new alphabet letter. So you would go to the next alphabet, which would be B, letter B. So poor rhymes with sore. That is why you see the actual rhyme scheme of BB. And then last line, which is the 5th line, it rhymes with our letter A pattern, for is the rhyme scheme. Sonnets. These are typically love poems. And sonnets are normally 14 lines in length and they follow an alternating rhyme scheme for the first 12 lines within the final 2 lines rhyming. So, for example, it's A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and then G, G. The last 2 lines, they rhyme, remember? And then the other pattern rhyme is an alternate rhyme scheme. A, B, A, B, and so forth. Now, haiku, it originated in Japan. Okay. Haikus are always containing 3 lines. The first and third lines have 5 syllables, while the second line has 7 syllables. And yes, students, in order for a poem to be considered a haiku, they have to follow these guidelines. It does not follow a rhyme scheme, however. So, as you notice, I was telling you earlier that all poems do not rhyme. This is a great example. Swaying back and forth, sunlight shining happily, green, sweet, fresh, plush, green. Okay, so the first and third lines have 5 syllables. Swaying back and forth. That is 5 syllables, students. The second line has 7 syllables. Sunlight, shining, happily. That is 7 syllables. And then we still go back to our third line, which has 5 syllables. Green, sweet, fresh, plush, green. That, of course, meets the expectations and requirements for a haiku poem. And no, it doesn't rhyme. Free verse. Most of us love the idea and the opportunity to write a free verse poem. Okay? This free verse poetry is not an accident. There is no rhyme scheme, there is no regular meter, there is no set structure. That is why it's free, and that is why we love to have the opportunity to write a free verse poem. It's like there's no rules. Ballads. Ballads are usually sung by minstrels or troubadours, okay? The subject of a ballad is typically an occasion or an event. So normally when you're reading a poem, it's about something specific, okay, for as an event that occurred or a special occasion. It uses simple rhyme schemes in a regular meter as far as the rhythm. And examples include John Henry and The Night Before Christmas, which we all love that. Most of us do. Narrative epic poem. Okay. A narrative epic poem is basically, of course, what it means a narrative. It's a complete story. Okay. However, all the story plot elements are present, but it's written in a poem format. It can be the longest type of poem, as we know, because you're actually telling a complete story. Examples include, okay, Beowulf, Odyssey, Sir Gawain, and the Green Knight. A lyric poem, we also, many of us love these because we know that I haven't said yet, but poetry is really rap, okay? And rap is poetry. There's a rhythm, there's a rhyme, okay? There's emotions expressed just like in rap as it would be in poetry. So they're all songs, any kind of songs, and not just rap. It could be country music, R&B, blues, jazz, gospel. It could be hard rock. It could be many other things as well, classical, okay, and so on. So let's do a recap and analyze a poem.
Hello, readers. Let's talk about poems. Poetry is a special kind of writing. If ordinary writing is like talking, then poetry is like singing. Poetry is a way of making art with language. Poems can express huge ideas or feelings. They can be about the sound or rhythm of language, or they can be goofy little jokes. It's like any other kind of writing. Poems can be about everything, or they can be about nothing at all. They can be funny or sad or sweet. They can rhyme. They can very much not rhyme. And all of that is, in my opinion, absolutely wonderful. I think of some poems as condensed ideas. They contain a lot of ideas in small amounts of text, so every word matters a lot. Those are little light bulbs representing ideas. So I'm going to look at a couple of poems today in order to describe some parts of a poem. Let's begin with the poem Cat by Marilyn Singer. It goes like this. Cat. I prefer warm fur, a perfect fire to lie beside, a cozy lap where I can nap, an empty chair when she's not there. I want heat on my feet, on my nose, on my hide. No cat I remember dislikes December inside. So the person who wrote this poem, Marilyn Singer, is the poet. For stories, the person who writes the poem is an author, but for poems, the writer is a poet. But who is telling the poem? Who's speaking? The person whose voice we hear in a poem is called the speaker, which is another thing I like about poetry. When you're having trouble understanding a poem, read it aloud. Part of the pleasure of poetry, for me, is hearing the words bounce around as you say them. And in this poem, I'm pretty sure the speaker is a cat. Now you'll notice there are only 3 sentences in this poem, but they're separated into 15 lines. You can see these lines have anywhere from 1 to 4 words in them. Lines can be as long or as short as a poet likes. But here the poet is creating these line breaks to indicate pauses and rhythms, right? Like normally we wouldn't start a new line here if this were prose, which is what we call all other forms of writing. Prose uses normal sentences and paragraphs, right? The poet is choosing to create line breaks in order to change the way the sentence or the line looks on the page. Poetry is not just about how it sounds, sometimes it's about how it looks as it's written. Now, in addition, the poet is also using spaces to scoot these 3 phrases over, as well as this word inside. The words themselves are scooted in. They're curled up and feeling cozy, like a cat by a fire in the middle of December. You'll also notice that some, but not all, of the lines rhyme with each other. And let's take a moment to think for a second, what is rhyming, really? One way to think about it is when the ending sound of a word matches the other ending sound of a word, like lap and nap, or when a bunch of sounds match each other throughout a pair of words, like remember and December. I want to be super clear about this part because I was already out of high school before I learned this thing, but poems don't have to rhyme. They can, but they definitely don't have to. I have one more poem part to describe to you, and to do it, I want to use Billy Collins' poem, Litany, which sounds like a fancy poem at first, but then becomes much more conversational. I'll end by reading the first 3 stanzas, which are these paragraph-looking things. Not all poems are broken into stanzas, but this one is. So, those are some parts of the poem. To review, a poet writes lines. The place where each line ends is called a line break, and a group of lines together in a paragraph is called a stanza. The voice that tells us the poem's narrator, is called the speaker. Some poems rhyme, others don't. Cool. Here's a snippet of Litany by Billy Collins. Litany. You are the bread and the knife, the crystal goblet and the wine. You are the dew on the morning grass and the burning wheel of the sun. You are the white apron of the baker and the marsh birds suddenly in flight. However, you are not the wind in the orchard, the plums on the counter, or the house of cards, and you are certainly not the pine-scented air. There is just no way that you are the pine-scented air. It is possible that you are the fish under the bridge, maybe even the pigeon on the general's head, but you are not even close to being the field of cornflowers at dusk. There's more, but I'd love it if you looked it up and read it aloud yourself. You can learn anything. David out.
All right, students, I hope you enjoyed the recap of what a poem is. And as we are aware, whenever you're writing the poetry, you are the poet. And of course, you can express your emotions. It doesn't have to rhyme, it can have a rhythm. Okay. You want to make sure that you are letting your readers understand the mood and the tone being set as you express using descriptive words and figurative language throughout your poem to bring life to it. And of course, we have the examples within this video that showed you how to analyze a poem, and you will continue to do so just as you would do in regular text.
Hello.
So here comes the most important slide of some of the slides here, as we can see. Yes, you will be completing a project. So students, here are some project requirements here for your poem. Yes, you will create a poem and you will present it to the class. All students are required to do so. It will need to include the appropriate poem elements and some illustrations to go with your poem so your reader, your audience can better understand what you're wanting to express. The assigned poem topics can be Thanksgiving, something or someone you are thankful for, the fall, and or family, and it will be due Thursday, November the 19th. If you do have any further questions, please get with your reading teacher and they better can go over the rubric with you. But once again, you are creating a poem that you will present in class. And make sure you include all of our appropriate poem elements that we've reviewed and learned today. Apply it to your own poem that you're writing as you being the poet. And keep in mind that it is due by Thursday, November the 19th.